It's question show time. Your questions, my answers. Wherever you are across my channel, if a question pops in your brain, just write it down. I'll gather them up and I will answer them here. I record this show every Monday at 5 p.m. Pacific live on my YouTube channel. So if you want to join me live, there'll be a link in the show notes where you can go and join the next event. If you're watching this afterwards, I recorded this episode on Monday, February 15th, 2021. So if some things are out of date, that's why. Trey Harmon asks, why do so many NASA Mars missions go straight for entry, descent, landing without orbital insertion first? Isn't this riskier? Thanks. That is a very good question. Right now, the Chinese mission, they've gone into orbit and it's going to deploy a lander rover now that it's safely in orbit. While, and same thing with the UAE mission, it's just nicely going into orbit. And as I think it was Pamela who said that the NASA is just coming in YOLO, just like straight in, punching into the atmosphere, slowing down and landing. And I think it's just because they can do it. They've pretty much mastered the technique of being able to deploy the parachute use the aeroshell first, kick out the aeroshell, use the parachute to be able to slow itself down, then use the crane to lower itself down, and use the rockets to slow itself down even more, and then land it gently on the surface. And that's just if you have to have like some kind of orbital capability, and then you've got to have some kind of descent thrusters and so on, just adds more complexity and weight to the mission. So my assumption, and I actually don't know that, I haven't talked to someone specifically about this, is that you don't need all that additional gear and propellant and all that. Instead of having to use propellant to slow yourself down to go into an orbital insertion, you're just using the atmosphere to slow yourself down. The problem so far is that NASA doesn't think that they can scale up the techniques that they're using to land on Mars really beyond what Perseverance and Curiosity. They're already pretty much at the limit of what you can do with this technique of entry, descent, and landing. They've got a plan they're working on with a kind of inflatable aeroshell that should get them up to like maybe 3 tons. But even that, they've been testing these out. It hasn't really gone the way they've wanted it to yet. So using this technique, they're not going to be able to land anything that's bigger than that. When you look at something like Starship, they're also going to do an entry, descent, and landing. But their plan is that they're going to use this belly flop technique and then just do a really high-powered thrust land to be able to actually get rid of all of the rest of their velocity. But that's still a big unknown. And, I think that we are right now, we're waiting for, like, we think about the checklist of things that have to be done to make sure that Starship is actually going to work. Right now they've got to land without exploding. But starships explode, is what they do. Then they've got to be able to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and really demonstrate that they can do that belly flop and then do that kick. But the atmosphere on Mars is rough. It's only 1% the thickness of the atmosphere on Earth. And so they've got to be able to do that belly flop maneuver, but they've got a lot less atmosphere to slow them down. And so they're going to have to sort of manage how much atmosphere are they using to sort of bleed off their velocity and slow themselves down, and then how much time are they going to spend using a propelled landing. And the more time they spend doing a propelled landing, the more propellant they have to use, the less cargo they can carry. So I think it's going to be trickier than, but I mean, like Elon Musk, he's kind of like me, like just always oversimplifies how this is all going to play out. So I'm interested to see just like what the final outcome is going to be with Starship. So, yeah. Michael West asks, how do you feel about SpaceX launching the moon platforms for NASA? Last couple of days, I guess last week, we got the announcement that NASA has officially announced they're going to be using the Falcon Heavy as the launcher for the first component of the Deep Space Gateway. That's going to be the power and propulsion system. And we had known for the last probably year or so that NASA was considering this. It was sort of under Jim Bridenstine's tenure at NASA to sort of start to open up more and more of the launch capability to private companies like Blue Origin, like SpaceX, ULA's Vulcan rocket, and so on. So this was kind of inevitable. Like, I think with the successful launches of the Falcon Heavy, demonstrating very heavy payloads, it brought the capability of this mission into the hands of the Falcon Heavy for a fraction of the price of an SLS. I mean, a Falcon Heavy is $90 million. An SLS is $1.5, $2 billion. Like, it just makes a mountain of sense to launch on a Falcon Heavy. So I think it's a great idea. I'm amazed. I mean, right now there is no super heavy launch vehicle. So there's nothing that could launch, say, the Artemis mission. Like, in theory, you could upscale a Crew Dragon, launch on one thing, do a dock in space, fly to the Lunar Gateway, and then use some kind of ferry vehicle to carry you down to the surface, use a Blue Origin lander. Like, you could probably make Artemis work with the hardware that exists today, but to just do the raw launch with the full stack, rebuild, recreate Apollo, you're going to still need a super heavy rocket. Now, obviously, Starship could do it, but right now Starships explode in Texas. So it's a little premature to fully count on that. And I think it's going to be a while before NASA lets Starships carry their astronauts. So if I was SpaceX, I would make a deep space version of Crew Dragon. I mean, here's the kind of amazing thing. Crew Dragon has more interior space than the Apollo capsule. Like, they're big. They're really big. And if you've only got, say, 3 astronauts on board, there's plenty of space. And so if you make another module that can go on with it, some kind of support module that can help keep the astronauts alive, you kind of don't need the Orion. So I think that with some creative work, SpaceX, Blue Origin, NASA could work together and I think dramatically cut the expenses of being able to do the Artemis mission. And I think that's the big thing right now, is that the SLS and the Orion capsule and all of that, it's built on the Saturn V concept. It's built on the Apollo concept. And we're in this much more modern time with new techniques and technologies. And I think that they can dramatically bring down the price. And if you bring down the price, then that allows you to do the missions for cheaper. It allows you to sustain the missions to the moon. And I think the thing that we need to get to as quickly as possible is a permanent inhabited base on the moon, in the way that we have a permanent inhabited base in space with the International Space Station. And so it can't be these $2 million flights to carry astronauts up to the moon. It's got to be this much more regular thing where you've got the Lunar Gateway, missions fly to the Lunar Gateway, deliver astronauts float around there. There's missions going up and down to the lunar base, and the people live on the lunar base for 6 months or a year or whatever. There's a lot of science that needs to be done, and we need a lunar base, and so we need to be able to stay. So I think it's great news. I think it's the exact right choice to use the Falcon Heavy, and I'm looking forward to more and more of that happening. Andrew Planet asks, if this universe as a whole is at least 250 times larger than the observable universe, doesn't that make this universe finite in size instead of infinite? Yeah, 2 possibilities exist. The universe is infinite, or the universe is finite. And if the universe is infinite, then it goes on forever. So it is definitely at least 250 times larger because it's infinite. Infinity is bigger than 250 times bigger. And so that's like the one possibility, is that it's infinite. But this 250 times larger is essentially, how big would the universe have to be, at least, so that we can't measure the curvature with our best instruments and our best observations to date? And so right now, when astronomers measure the curvature of the universe, they get no curvature. They get that the universe is flat. And just to give you an analogy, right? Like, say you were an ant crawling around on the Earth, and you attempted to measure the curvature of the Earth and say the Earth was perfectly flat. And if your best instrument tell you that the Earth is flat, then you could calculate how big the Earth would have to be for it to be a sphere. At the very, and it would be some enormous size. Like you'd be like, okay, if the Earth is bigger than 20,000 kilometers across, it's a sphere, then it's a sphere. Or it's just a flat plane. Like either I'm an ant walking around on a flat plane, or at the very least, it's a sphere that is, I guess, the diameter of the Earth is like 13,000 kilometers across. Or it's a sphere 13,000 kilometers across. Ant says, I can't rule out that the Earth is finite. It could be an infinite plane, but that's the minimum size. And so when astronomers say they still don't know whether the universe is finite or infinite. If it's infinite, it goes on forever. If it's finite, then to their best measurement, it is at least the number you said, 250 times bigger than the observable universe that we can see. And as our instruments get better and better, then the minimum size of the universe will continue to grow. And maybe at some point, astronomers will say it is at least 1,000 times bigger. It's at least 10,000 times bigger. But they may never, unless they actually measure the size, and they go, oh, it is exactly 950 times bigger than the observable universe. We may never be able to solve that. Just know that the universe is bigger, at least, than what we can perceive. Of course, we can't reach, we'll never be able to reach more than 6% of the observable universe anyway, because it's all going to be flying away from us faster than the speed of light. So just don't worry about it. Visto2D asks, would the event horizon of an enormous black hole appear flat? Sure. Yeah. I mean, it depends on the size, right? If it was a black hole the size of 250 times bigger than the observable universe, then it would appear flat. But because a black hole, an enormous black hole, is inside our universe, then pretty much any black hole that we can observe is going to be smaller than the universe, and so we would perceive it as a circle. But if you got really, really close to it, which I do not recommend, then you might have a difficult time being able to tell, measuring the curvature of the black hole. And so, yeah, but I mean, it would need to be really big. Matter Hat. If I gave you $50 billion to spend on space, what would you do? $50 billion. That's not a lot. I mean, I would go through that pretty quickly. What would I do? What are my priorities? I would build the overwhelmingly large telescope for about $4 billion. So we go right to the 100-meter telescope. I would put a radio telescope on the far side of the moon for about $1 billion. I would build a next generation space telescope. I would construct it in space. I probably wouldn't build LUVOIR. I would build something that would be bigger than LUVOIR, but it would be constructed in space. I would build a really powerful space-based gravitational wave observatory so that we could see primordial gravitational waves. I would upgrade the square kilometer array to a larger version, and I would send more missions. I'd send missions to Venus. I'd send missions to Io. I'd send missions to Ganymede, some kind of lander maybe. Missions to Neptune, Uranus, and more missions to Titan to see the seas on Titan. And then there's some other pretty cool ideas that I really like. There's an idea of building these electric sails, and you build a whole bunch of tiny little CubeSats. I do a lot of CubeSat missions. Now that NASA has been able to prove that they could send a CubeSat to Mars, and they were able to communicate back to Earth, I would send CubeSats out into the asteroid belt all over the place. I'm sure there's a way you could send a whole bunch out on the same mission so that you could sample lots and lots of different ones. I'd build the Comet Interceptor mission, but maybe a fancier version so that you could chase down the next interstellar object that passes through the solar system. And I would definitely build a lunar base, but I think I ran out of money. People are saying, yeah, Arecibo 2, but on the moon. It wouldn't exactly be Arecibo 2. The mission that I really like is this idea of you put this lander on the moon, and then you have a rover that goes out and just lays out antennae, these flat antennae, like the Murchison array. The one, like, it's going to be what the square kilometer array is. They're these sort of Christmas trees, and this rover would place out these Christmas trees in a giant flower-shaped structure on the moon, and then it would be able to detect the first stars forming in the universe, like not just the first galaxies, but the first stars. It would be able to detect the magnetospheres of extrasolar planets, which is sort of, you would discover planets by detecting that they have a protective magnetosphere, which is kind of a great idea. Essentially, it'd be a twofer, right? Because you would find another Earth, and you would know that other Earth had a protective magnetosphere, which is kind of a clever idea. So yeah, I really like that idea of a telescope. If I had to pick one thing, it would be the overwhelmingly large telescope. For whatever, 4 billion, 5 billion, 10 billion, it's a bargain to have a 100-meter telescope. That should be a top priority, because then you can use it for all kinds of things. John Wolfe, do you own any stocks or companies that have to do with space, like Virgin Galactic or others? Any recommendations? I do, but not intentionally. I own index funds. So, I have my retirement account, and I buy low-cost index funds that buy big chunks of the market, and then I don't think about it, because that's sort of like the safest way to invest. But if you do, then you own all kinds of things. And apparently, Google owns a tiny fraction of SpaceX. And so by owning an index fund that owns the entire market, I own a little bit of Google, and that little bit of Google owns a little bit of SpaceX. So in theory, I must have $1 or $2 in SpaceX, probably less. I don't know. They announced they're going to be making Starlink public, which is kind of exciting. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of getting into kind of speculative investments. That's Universe Today. That's my business. That's what I've invested my time, money, and life into. I really kind of think that investing in specific companies is kind of a sucker's game, that it's better to just invest in a broad index fund. I want to give a shout out to my favorite podcast called The Rational Reminder, which is it's a Canadian podcast, but they talk about investing and things like that. And it's totally been super helpful on how to sort of think about it. And there's a YouTuber named Ben Felix, and he's great. And I highly recommend his stuff. If you're Canadian, just anyone, just looking for a science-based approach to investing, I highly recommend his channel. Nancy Graziano. Since the universe is expanding faster than the speed of light, assuming intelligent life survives here, will there be a time when nothing will be visible beyond our solar system in the night sky? So there will always be stars, for the lifetime of the sun. Say the sun's going to live for another 5 billion years. Of course, the sun is going to boil the Earth's oceans in about 1 billion years. So let's say, but somehow we survive in the solar system, living in our O'Neill cylinders for a few billion years. We will see stars in the Milky Way for billions of years, long beyond the time that the sun has died. And then you can move to some other solar system and you'll still see stars. What you'll see less and less of millennia after millennia is galaxies. Distant galaxies. So anything that's in the local group is gravitationally bound to the Milky Way, Andromeda, M33, all of the smaller, they're all eventually going to merge into one super galaxy. But everything else is being carried away by the expansion of the universe, and it's being accelerated away by dark energy. And so we're going to see the color. Eventually those galaxies will get their color, the light will get redshifted farther and farther away into the red end of the spectrum. So eventually the light of a galaxy will turn red, and then the galaxies will turn infrared, and they'll go into the microwave, and they'll go into the radio waves, and they'll just get longer and longer and longer until we can no longer detect the that we can no longer detect these other galaxies. And so when that happens, if you're living in, but that's like 1 trillion years from now, like it's a long time away before there are no other galaxies except for the local group. But yeah, if a planet formed on a star in this new super mega galaxy, which won't be forming a lot of stars anymore after that sort of initial mergers all happen, then there won't be any concept of cosmology beyond the galaxy. That they won't see the cosmic microwave background. They won't see other galaxies. It'll feel like the universe has always been. But that said, there will always be ways. There'll always be tricks and techniques that they'll be able to use. I mean, they can build a radio telescope that could detect radio waves that are kilometers across with a wavelength. And so they would still get a sense that there's more to the universe than just the local group that we can see. They'll be able to sort of look out, they'll be able to see the interstellar medium, they'll be able to kind of, the intergalactic medium, sort of make these detections. So there won't be a time, I think, where any future civilization will just not have any concept whatsoever of the larger cosmos. Verdadero. Hey Fraser, why the costs and difficulties in sending a man to the moon are greater than 50 years ago? They're not. The costs and difficulties of sending people to the moon now are a fraction of what they used to be, and way more accessible than it was during the Apollo era. So just to give you some context here, right? Back during the Apollo era, while the Apollo missions were being designed and built, NASA's budget was about $500 billion in inflation-adjusted money. And the actual, just like the budget for the moon landings was about $300 billion. When you compare that to today, and that's like inflation-adjusted dollars, right? So you compare that to today, NASA's annual budget is about $20 billion, but they only get about half that, a third that is spent on human spaceflight. The rest is spent on science and atmosphere study and things like that. So they're actually really trying to essentially recreate the Apollo missions on an absolute shoestring. And the only way you can do that is thanks to modern technology, reusable rockets, things like SpaceX Falcon, the knowledge that's been gained over time, the miniaturization, the new computers, the more powerful ability to communicate, and so on. And so when the astronauts go back, and like I said, the goal should really be to build a base. It's not just to, like, if they set foot on the moon again and then come home and then don't do it again, then it will have been a horrible mistake. They should not have embarked upon Constellation, SLS, Artemis, any of that. But in this modern age, I mean, SpaceX, a private company, funded through some customers and some investments, was able to make a rocket capable of launching multiple times for like $60 million is what it costs to launch on a Falcon 9, $90 million if you want to launch on a Falcon Heavy. It's so cheap compared to what it was back in the Apollo era. So no, the costs are way down. The difficulties are way down. We've learned a ton about how to fly, live, build hardware, live in space, all that kind of stuff. And so that's why I really think that back in the 1960s and 70s, the goal of setting a human on the moon required the concentration of an entire nation state, of the United States and the Soviet Union, focusing 100% of their energy to win this goal. And this time around, it's just like it's a budgetary line. Oh, and by the way, we're going to go to the moon and set up a base and build a space station that orbits the moon and so on. So no, totally different time. And that's good news, because a gigantic budget, gobbling effort like the Apollo era it just wouldn't fly anymore. So no, I think I'm glad that the prices are down, the capabilities are up, and it's a good time to go to the moon. More questions in a second, but first I'd like to thank Graham Weldon, Dionysius Lynn, Mark Campbell, Zach Perry, Reed Smith, Jacob Sundin, and the rest of our 855 patrons for their generous support. Want our videos early with no ads? Join our community at patreon.com/universetoday. Matter Hat. First Feet on Mars. Has your opinion changed over the past 5 years? I wonder what 5 years ago Fraser thought about First Feet on Mars. I'm sure someone could dig up me blathering on about it. So you tell me if my current thinking on Mars has changed from the way I used to talk about it. I think my feelings about Mars have really, like, I think 5 years ago I was kind of into colonizing Mars, and now I'm not into it. I'm totally into sending humans to Mars to explore Mars. Just in the way that we have a base in space, we should have a base on the moon, and we should have a base on Mars, and we should have a base on Ceres, maybe a base on a couple of other asteroids. That would be really cool. But a scientific base, a place where science gets done, not where people go and live and try to eke out a horrible existence in a completely unforgiving environment. Because if you want to do that, there's places here. Like, if you want to really test yourself, there's places. And I hadn't really thought through that 5 years ago. 5 years ago, it's like, yeah, Mars is the next frontier. Let's go. Let's live there. And now I'm like, oh man, Mars really sucks. Let's, like, you've got, like, go, but just appreciate the fact that it's awful. And so when I think about my thinking then, I was sort of thinking, like, first you send the astronauts to go and explore, and then you send a bigger base, you build a bigger base, and then you build a city like Elon Musk. And now I'm kind of against it. Like, I really am. I'm really like, let's not build a city on Mars. Yeah. And I think, like, a city on Mars will be as successful as a city village on Mars will be about as successful as a village in Antarctica, which is not very. People have tried to live in Antarctica and failed, many times, because it's tough. It's really hard to live there. There's places that are really extreme, and I'm sure in the beginning you're like, yeah, free space where I can really stretch my legs and no one can tell me what to do, man. I'm living my best version of myself. And you're like, I'm cold, and there's no food, and it's always stormy and dark, and on Mars you get to add, like, and I can't breathe. And there's radiation. And there's no water or life. Like, yeah, but, like, I know that you can sort of test yourself. But anyway, so I know I'm kind of rambling, but I think that, so, if someone said, like, here's our plan to build the city on Mars, I'm like, no, I'm not signing up for this. I'm not going to sign on. And so that's why I think when I hear Elon Musk say, like, oh yeah, I'm going to send humans to Mars, they're going to live on Mars, they're going to love it. I don't think they will. I just think some people think they're going to love it, and then they're going to go, and then they're going to hate it, and they're going to want to come home. But I do think that SpaceX via Starship will be capable of sending humans sooner than I had originally thought. Like, back 5 years ago, I would have said in the mid-2030s. Now I definitely think we'll see humans set foot on Mars before the end of the 2020s. Like, not long. Like, Musk still thinks 2026. I think that's maybe a little aggressive, but 2028? That doesn't sound crazy, as long as there's a way to come home again. So yeah, I think people are going to be setting foot on Mars sooner, and I think Mars is a less interesting place to live on than it ever was. I say gravity wells are for suckers. Have that sign there, but even that, like there will be a time when sorry, Moochie the cat, but Fraser Cain, freedom, horrible freedom. Yeah, exactly. Just terrible, terrible, painful, awful freedom. Anyways, right now, existing in space, like existing in Antarctica, or like existing in the death zone on Mount Everest, just requires this mountain of supply and support where you're living on the razor's edge of survival. And that's no way to live. Like, that's a way to accomplish something kind of amazing, but it's no way to just live. But there will be a time when our technology will trivialize these things. And each advancement in this technology, as it trivializes our capability to live in extreme conditions, then what seemed like a terrible idea will suddenly seem like a great idea. Like, yeah, do you want to go live on Mars? Sure, why not? Just hop in our metallic hydrogen-fueled, fusion-thrusted rocket, fly to Mars in about a week, land on Mars, hang out at the spa in the anti-grav city. I don't know, or like living in the big O'Neill cylinder. Like, when these things are there, it will be obvious when we're capable of being able to build these things and surviving these things. And until then, it just won't make sense, in the same way that it just doesn't make sense to try to eke out existence in Antarctica. Like, there's plenty of places on Earth that you can stretch your legs, have some freedom, and not worry that you're going to constantly freeze to death or asphyxiate. 6 Bob Ohms. Fraser, would a moon city protect humanity from extinction as well as a Mars city, or no? I don't think that a Mars city or a moon city will really protect humanity from extinction. Maybe, again, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, when we've got lots of the capability, we've trivialized, like, that's the key, that we have trivialized the environment. In the same way, like, think about a person living in the desert of Arizona in the summer, that your air conditioner has trivialized living in Arizona. That is how it needs to feel. And so until that technology comes along, it's just going to be constant suffering, hard scrabble to survive, supported by an enormous amount of resources that are being sent from Earth to keep everybody going. So if there's some devastating problem on Earth, then the Mars colony, the moon colony starves. They run out of resources and they all die. And then you think about the kind of scenarios. Like, sure, yeah, pandemic, yeah, if you're on the moon and there's a global pandemic on Earth, then you're fine. But a global pandemic on Earth won't wipe out humanity. It'll be bad and lead to a lot of death, but then some people will be immune and there'll be vaccines and it'll just be a hit. You know, when you think about climate change, horrible climate change, the worst case scenario of climate change is still a zillion times better than the moon or Mars. Like, the worst we could do to the climate is still just a paradise compared to the moon or Mars. Like, the artificial intelligence, yeah, the artificial intelligence takes over on Earth, and then they build up just spaceships and they chase you to the moon. So you can't get away from killer AI. So I don't really think that there are any things that we can really protect. Like, that's not a good justification to build a moon or Mars colony, I think, in my opinion. Yeah, I think the purpose to build a moon base or a Mars base or a space base is to do it, to demonstrate that we have the capability to explore farther and farther out into the solar system, to learn more. But let's take our time. We're in no rush, right? We already have found the best place in the entire universe, which is the Earth, which is conveniently under our feet. So everything else that we find is gravy. And every moment that we spend making our planet worse, the best place in the universe. Seriously, aliens, bring it on. I stand by. That is the hill that I'll die on. We've got the best planet in the universe, for us, because we evolved here. Yeah, there's like no reason to go any other place. But of course, you want to go to other places, and so, but you do it to explore. You do it to advance your knowledge. You do it to understand our place in the cosmos. And I don't know, like, there's this show you can watch called Alone, and they drop people on Vancouver Island. Actually, it's kind of funny, and they have to survive on Vancouver Island for, and like everywhere I look around, just like, oh, that looks like home. And they are sad and alone, and they go crazy one after the other every time. No matter how each time they go into it thinking, I'm going to be the the ultimate survivor. I don't need other human beings. I don't need warmth and food and companionship and the internet and all that kind of stuff. And then it turns out they do every time. They're sad, alone. They just want to go home. I guarantee that is what the first Mars colonists, moon colonists are going to be like. I want to go home. I just wish I didn't have to spend half of my day running my O2 scrubber, my CO2 scrubber, to just breathe. This is getting old. So, yeah, that's how I feel. The late night gamer. Could we crash Mars into Pluto to make it habitable eventually? Which one are we crashing into what? So wait a second. So we're going to crash Mars into Pluto to make Pluto habitable? No. If we crashed Mars into Pluto, you would end up with a world that was roughly the mass of Mars, like a little more. And Mars is like the 10th the mass of the Earth, but it would be out of the orbit of Pluto. And so it would be really cold. So briefly, it would be a mess, and then it would all freeze again and get cold back down to the point that you've got nitrogen making glaciers. Now, if you brought Pluto into the inner solar system and crashed it into Mars, you'd make a mess for like a while, millions of years, while it's, would turn Mars molten again. And then it would cool down, and the sun would blast away all of the volatiles off of it and out into deep space. And then it would be a little more massive than it is today. So no, neither of those is going to really do the trick. Gwym, do you think AI and advanced automation will one day make travel to the moon, Mars relatively cheap? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about trivialization. And we don't know what ways of living are going to be trivialized by our technology, but we know for certain that they will. That we are going to come up with new technologies, either a really powerful propulsion system like metallic hydrogen or antimatter engine or plasma thruster or something that's going to make getting out of the Earth's gravity well. Because right now, chemical rockets are right at the very edge of what's possible to get off of planet Earth. And so you fire your chemical rocket full bore, you've got 99% of your fuel is just to get you into orbital velocity. And you have this teeny tiny little payload. And if the Earth was any more massive, then that system wouldn't work. So we're right at the edge of what's possible. But again, imagine if you had a car and you filled up your car with gas, and then it was just enough gas to get you to the next gas station that was like a kilometer away. And then you fill it up with gas again, and then just enough gas. Like, that would be awful. Except also your car was 99% gas tank, and you destroyed it after every time you got to the next gas station. Anyway, so it's about trivializing. Like there will be new technologies that come along. AI, definitely. I mean, again, and we develop an AI. It comes up with some really clever solutions to some really tricky problems, and suddenly all of our problems have been solved. And we don't know what artificial intelligence will come up with. It's going to come up with some crazy stuff, for sure. Like, imagine you invent a much smarter person than you who then goes about solving all your problems, also creating new ones. Who knows what that's all going to be about? So I think, I think we don't know what the future holds. We just know that it will be more and new and different and not what we expect. And so if you kind of have one expectation, is that the future will be weird. Ted Krause, do you think we should spend all this time on bettering our planet than Mars? Like, are you asking why should we bother spending anything on space flight, and instead we should be spending money on Earth? No, we should be spending plenty of money on space flight, and because money spent in space actually gets spent down here on Earth. If you buy a rocket to go to space, what you're actually doing is you're paying engineers and scientists and an entire supply chain here on Earth to build your rocket. Now, sure, you could buy a carbon sequestration machine for the same amount of money and have a different impact. But money spent on space is money spent on Earth. And we do know that our lives have been made immeasurably better by space technology, by satellites, by our radio telescopes, by our understanding just of science in general. So no, I am a gigantic fan of us spending way more money on space exploration and astronomy than we do today. And that the wonderful benefit is that also makes the Earth better. I mean, we now have satellites capable of measuring methane exhaust, leaked methane, which is like a third of the greenhouse gases from tiny little methane leaks all around the world, because we've got a satellite that does this. So no, I think we make Earth better by spending money on space exploration. Professor Newman, between the Zeely Sequence, Culture Series, Ringworld, Three-Body Problem, which would you recommend to read first? Well, I've only read 3 of those. I haven't read the Zeely Sequence. So I would read the Three-Body Problem, no question. It's mind-blowing. Like, I can't get across how amazing the Three-Body Problem series is. First one, bit of a slog. Second one really gets going, expands your mind. You're really excited for what happens. The third one just goes places you were not prepared, that your mind was just not ready to comprehend. The Ringworld series, they're fine. I like them back in the day. I don't think they hold up that much. And the Culture series, I've only read the first one. Consider Plebius. I haven't read the rest yet. They're on my list, but I liked it. It was great book. So, but I haven't read the Zeely Sequence. So if anyone has a recommendation on that one. Sohaib Kazi, can the microphone on Perseverance rover catch the sounds of the Ingenuity helicopter like the sounds from its propellers? Yeah. So Perseverance is the first spacecraft that's ever been sent to Mars, first rover, first mission that's been sent to Mars that has a proper microphone on board. And this is a thing that NASA has wanted to do, and specifically the Planetary Society has been advocating for decades. Like they've been trying to get, and they've done designs for them. They've advocated for it, and for whatever reason, the microphone was cut out of the budget for the spacecraft. The spacecraft crashed. A microphone has never gotten to Mars before. We had kind of a microphone with InSight. It was able to detect sounds in the air through its seismograph and so on, but that's not the same. But Perseverance will have a microphone on board, and yeah, of course, it's gonna be listening, as it's gonna be hearing the wind blowing. It's gonna be hearing its wheels rolling around on the surface of Mars. It's gonna hear the helicopter take off and then hear it crash, which it will do, because I mean, come on. All helicopters, all little toy helicopters crash when you get them. So, yeah, it should be able to hear that. I gotta say, that's one of the things I'm most excited about is that we're gonna hear Mars for the first time. We've seen it, but we will hear it. We will see pictures and hear the wind blowing against the rover, hearing the sand shifting around it. I'm really excited about a microphone. Zachary, what are the most likely space technologies to advance quality of life on Earth in the next few years? I mean, we're already kind of experiencing it with Starlink, with the ability to have telecommunications anywhere on Earth. I mean, for most people right now, their access to the internet is either non-existent. Like half planet Earth can't access the internet. And then the other half, you hate your internet service provider. Come on, admit it. Like, who among you loves the company that brings you internet today? So imagine a world of completely ubiquitous internet all the time, that your cell phone is connected at blazing speeds all the time, and you never even think about it. Earth observation. I talked about methane. Think about just our ability to track from space every single problem that's happening on Earth and to be able to transmit that so people can deal with it. Fires, being able to detect fires as they're starting. Apparently now earthquakes can potentially be, they think they can sense where earthquakes are going to happen. They essentially feed landscapes into artificial intelligence, and it seems to be able to guess where earthquakes are likely to happen. So you can just imagine all of these ways, traffic patterns, just all these, again, the more satellites that we have in space observing the Earth, the more knowledge that we can have about our existence. So it just goes on and on and on. But I think that's the big one. Like ubiquitous access to the internet for as much of humanity as possible at a reasonable, eventually free price is going to be a game changer. And that will connect all of humanity into one big brain. So yeah, that. All right, we've reached the end of our hour. I hope you all had a wonderful family day, which is what we call it in Canada. I think it's some kind of holiday in the US. But anyway, thank you, everybody, for joining me tonight, spending your precious time listening to me ramble about not going to Mars. Thank you to everyone who asked questions and watching on YouTube and on Twitch. Thanks, of course, to our moderators and to Nancy Graziano for putting in all of the questions so that I was able to stay marginally organized. If you want a single comprehensive resource for space news, you'll want to subscribe to my weekly email newsletter. Every Friday, I send out a magazine of space news with dozens of articles, with pictures, brief highlights about the story, and links so you can find out more. Go to universetoday.com/newsletter to sign up. It's totally free. And did you know that all of my videos are also available in a handy audio podcast format so that you can have the latest episodes as well as special bonus material like interviews with me show up on your audio device? Go to universetoday.com/audio or search for Universe Today on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And I'll put a link in the show notes.